Friends, good afternoon on the East Coast. Good morning on the West Coast. We're delighted to have all of you with us today. I hope your holiday season is midstream and going well, and it will get better as we get even closer to the end of the year. I'm Mark Skorka, president of Opera America, and as everyone knows, we had quite a midterm election that surprised many of the pundits about the outcome. That outcome not finally determined until just this past Tuesday. There's a lot to make sense of, and Opera America's incredible Director of Government Affairs, Tony Shivers, offered to do a webinar for us that would explain the implications and the responsibilities associated with the implications of the midterm elections and how they have an impact on the opera field. So it is without any further ado, but deep appreciation, that I introduce Tony Shivers, Opera America's Director of Government Affairs. Tony, over to you.
Thank you, Mark, for that kind introduction. I really appreciate it. And again, just to indicate, my name is Tony Shivers. I'm also Director of Government Affairs for Dance USA, which is a national service organization for the dance ecosystem that's based in Washington, D.C. I am actually based in Herndon, Virginia, Northern Virginia, about 25 miles west of Washington, D.C., and I can quickly get to the city to represent and advance the interests of Opera America's members. It's been a pleasure to work with you all since I came aboard in July of 2020, not only in helping you all deal with the challenges of this current pandemic, but to help pass over $6 trillion in pandemic relief that Congress has passed, and to make sure that hundreds of millions of dollars has gone to the opera community, in which you all need and deserve, as you all try to maintain operations and keep your staff and continue to provide high quality public performances and public programming. Just wanted to indicate that the slide deck that my colleagues will bring up in a second or two will be available and will be sent to all attendees immediately following the event. Provides some great information as to how you all can be effective advocates, not only for your respective companies, but also for your local arts communities. It's been a great day for me, actually, so far, because there's been some great news this morning. Congress just officially codified into law same-sex marriage and interracial marriages. And so hopefully that will be pretty much the end of that issue going forward, as far as any debate or issues. And then one of the WNBA stars, Brittany Griner, is coming home from Russia, and that's been the result of effective advocacy on the part of the basketball community and other interested stakeholders. And so that's just a example of, those are just examples of what effective advocacy can do in order to advance various issues of interest. Let me, if I can have my colleagues bring up the slideshow, that would be fantastic. And so what I wanted to do with this webinar, and the objectives of this webinar is, as Mark indicated, is to highlight the results of the recent midterm elections and what the impact and implications will be for the opera community and overall arts and cultural sector going forward as we head into a new 2-year session of Congress. I wanted to just briefly talk about at the top the importance of civic engagement. And if you all are in the civic engagement space, how you can increase that civic engagement effectively, not only to increase the visibility of your respective company and your local arts community, but also the overall arts and cultural sector, and how it is important, not only on the creative side, but also economically at all levels, national, state, and local levels. And then a part of that civic engagement is being an effective advocate. And I'll talk about what it means to be an effective advocate, what does advocacy means, and then some of those advantages there. Obviously, I'll talk about the midterm election results and then the implications of that on the opera community going forward, as far as advancing our issues of interest and being able to support the creative economy and individual creative workers, critically important. And then we'll highlight and elevate what can be done now by the end of this year, as we head into, again, a new 2-year session of Congress. There are several pieces of legislation that will immediately benefit the opera community that Congress needs to pass. and they need to pass by the end of the year. And we'll talk about that later on in this event. Next slide, please. And so civic engagement and what and why. And so there are various types of civic engagement. I mentioned advocacy a couple of seconds ago. There's also community engagement, the election space as far as voter registration and get out the vote efforts, and then a variety of volunteer initiatives. It's just critically important for opera communities, or opera companies rather, and the opera community to be more visible, to do the things that they can do to help benefit families and children in their local communities. Not only providing greater access to the arts, but just other things that they can do to help improve the lives of families and children in their local communities. And there's a variety of advantages to that. Potentially being able for government support. So federal government, the state government, and your local government are always watching and looking out for potential partners that can help them achieve their missions. And so there's monies involved. There's also potential collaborations involved where agencies can collaborate with companies and nonprofit organizations to, again, benefit families and children in the local communities at large. One piece of that government support is FEMA, emergency reliefs. So the Federal Emergency Management Agency here in Washington, D.C. actually has a whole host and a network of state and local affiliates, as well as they have relationships with state emergency management agencies. And so think of any natural disaster, including this current pandemic, which is considered a national disaster, a natural emergency. And so there is monies that performing arts organizations, including opera companies, can receive to not only maintain their operations, but to also help them improve their communities. And so being a valuable partner, being visible, can help governments see that and can help provide monies for your individual companies. Potential coalition opportunities, as well as just gaining interest from potential donors and grant makers, because they see you as a valuable contributor and partner in your local communities. Next slide, please. Here's just some examples of increasing your civic engagement, offering your facility, whether you own, manage, or otherwise operate your facility, offering up your facility or venue as a place for organizations to meet. In the election space, hosting candidate forums where both sides of the political aisle can meet and discuss the issues of the day, collaborating with your local education institutions, collaborating with your local business and nonprofit sectors to develop and implement community-based initiatives. All of these are just great ways. Try to be as creative as possible, but the main thing is to be visible and to try to produce results to improve the lives of your local communities. Next slide, please. So advocacy, no doubt, is an important piece of civic engagement. And so, three important things, or three important pillars of advocacy is developing relationships, telling your story, and then urging your elected officials to act, whether that's to support, whether that is to oppose legislation. Those are three important pillars of advocacy that you all need to know and remember kind of going forward as far as being effective advocates for your companies in opera community. Telling your story in a variety of ways. The most easier thing that you can tell is, how has the pandemic impacted your operations? How has it impacted your individual staff and individual creative workers throughout your local arts community? Those are things that your elected officials need to know about, because Congress, your states, and your local officials do not know what they don't know. And that is why they meet with a variety of constituents and voters throughout the year, so they can get a sense of what's going on in the community, so they can inform themselves on issues and legislation that is being considered at all levels of government. And here's the thing, they also meet with constituents to find out legislation that they're considering right now that they're going to vote on how that legislation is going to impact their voters and their business and nonprofit sectors. And so meetings and engagement with the elected officials at all levels of government is critically important. And needless to say, Opera America is a nonpartisan organization. You all should be engaging with your elected officials regardless of the political affiliation. Critically important because any election cycle can bring control to any one political party at any given time. And so it's important that you all engage all political sides to ensure that your interests are being addressed and that they can move forward and be informed on what's critically important for the opera community and local arts and cultural sector. Next slide, please. Midterm election results. I would imagine that a lot of you have already seen the results and know about the results, but just wanted to highlight some important facets of that. And so as you can see, prior to the election, the Democrats had control of the U.S. House of Representatives. All 435 seats were up. That is true for any election cycle. Every 2 years, all seats in the U.S. House are up for election. 218 seats are needed to control that chamber. As a result of the recent midterms, the Republicans the Republican Party has control over the chamber. You can see the breakdown in seats there. Unfortunately, a congressional member from Virginia recently passed away, and so that vacancy needs to be filled in Virginia via special election. But regardless of that, Republicans will have control of the U.S. House of Representatives for the 118th Congress. You can see there 77 new representatives compared to the 2020 election cycle, and this is democracy at work. Holding elected officials accountable. If they're not being responsive, if they're not doing the things that they need to do to benefit the lives of their constituents, they could be voted out of office. And then so it's critically important that you all are engaged, registering to vote, urging others to register to vote, getting to the polls, and making sure that candidates and political candidates are being held accountable and that they know the important issues that they need to address when in office. Another important piece that I want to highlight and specifically I'm really happy about is the increased representation of women in Congress. And then you can see the breakdown there as far as women in the U.S. House. There's a total of 149 women that will be serving in the 118th Congress next year. This is one more woman compared to this current Congress, but I'm extremely happy and it's progress that we have the amount of women that we do that are representing their constituents in Congress. More work needs to be done, but I'm glad that there is a large number of women representation. Next slide, please. For the 118th Congress, you can see just the breakdown in leadership for both of the parties. Kevin McCarthy, who is currently the minority leader, the leader of the Republicans in this Congress, will likely be the House Speaker, replacing Representative Nancy Pelosi. There will be a U.S. House-wide vote on January the 3rd. But again, it is likely that he will be the House Speaker going forward. And you can see the breakdown there as far as what the leadership will look like. I can tell you that most of these leaders are and have been supportive of the arts. And so that's great going forward as far as what we are doing, as far as advocacy work and advancing legislation that will immediately benefit the opera community. Next slide, please. So on the Senate side, U.S. Senate side, 35 seats were up for election. The Democratic Party had control with the tie-breaking vote of Vice President Kamala Harris. As a result of the midterms, the Democrats will keep and maintain control of the chamber. There was a recent runoff in Georgia. The Democratic incumbent, Reverend Warnock, got the win there, added one more seat for control. 7 U.S. senators, you can see the states there. and it is just great as far as just the women representation there. Obviously, more work needs to be done to ensure that the chamber itself is more diverse. But again, I'm personally happy about the women representation at this point in time. Next slide, please. At the state level, you can see the breakdown there. I just want to highlight that governors are critically important in the advocacy space because they are the first line of recipiency for federal relief and support. For example, the U.S. Treasury, as a result of the American Rescue Plan that was passed back in March of 2021, $350 billion went to states, local territories, local governments, and Indian territories. $350 billion. Governors have the authority to actually support their hardest hit industries as a result of the law. And so again, governors are critically important to have those relationships with those governors. But you can see the breakdown there. Party affiliation, not important. I just want you to all know that governors are critically important in the advocacy space and that you all need to have those relationships there. Next slide, please. Just some historic firsts as far as women representation there in a number of states. And again, the nation is moving and getting to a place where representation is even more diverse, whether it's by gender, whether that's by race or by cultural affiliation. And so there's great news there. But those are just some highlights there. Next slide, please. On the state legislative side, just a couple of things just to keep in mind, that there's just 98 individual legislatures across the country. There you can see the breakdown as far as the political control. But the important piece out of this particular slide is that the state legislatures are also important. They also have access to federal monies. They also determine out of their state budgets whether the arts and cultural sector will be supported or not. So again, advocacy is not only important at the national level, at the federal level, but also at the state level with your governors, as well as with your state legislatures and your individual legislators. Next slide, please. And then you can see the results there. Again, not really much change as far as the pickups between the political parties, but again, state legislatures are critically important in the advocacy space. Next slide, please. So as I indicated a few minutes ago, that by January of 2023, Congress will be in a new 2-year session of Congress. Beginning January the 3rd. That means that any legislation that's not passed by the end of this year will have to go through the legislative process all over again. And so that means reintroduction, going to committees for consideration, getting to the floor for votes. And so it's critically important, and I'll mention in a couple of minutes, that there's pieces of legislation right now that we need to get passed, including funding and including some beneficial tax policies, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, but a whole new session of Congress. So that also means that there's some exciting opportunities for you all to get engaged, not only to develop relationships with your newly elected officials, but to also talk about what needs to be done to support your company, your local arts community, and the creative economy going forward. Not only the creative economy, but individual creative workers going forward as our nation moves beyond the pandemic. You can see the list of issues there. These are not all inclusive. They're not exhaustive, and they're not and they're subject to change at any given time, depending on the issues of the day and what is happening around the country and around the world. But these are just some of the major issues that you all need to be aware of. Crime and inflation and border security issues that the likely House Speaker, Representative Kevin McCarthy from California, has specifically indicated to the media as far as what the U.S. House will tackle in the new Congress. And it is my job, it is your job and the job of our partners across the arts and cultural sector to integrate and weave arts and cultural issues into those issues. How does crime, how can arts and culture and humanities impact and reduce the amount of crime? I can tell you right now, there is a demonstration project that is implemented by the U.S. Department of Justice, and they provide grants to arts related entities to engage juvenile delinquents, to provide them places to go, things to do, weaving in arts and to harness their creative sides. Right now, we are working to ensure that the demonstration program within that agency is adequately funded. And so that's just one way as to how the arts and cultural sector can benefit many issues across the spectrum. The debt limit will be a critical issue that you'll hear about in 2023. The debt limit right now is about $31.4 trillion, and that all depends on the revenues that's coming in, how federal government is spending money, but it's about a little over $31 trillion. That will be a critical piece because the debt limit will need to be raised to actually allow the government to pay for its past debts and obligations. And so both political parties will be utilizing the debate as far as raising the limit to actually push other policies. And so this, just know that debt limit will be a critical issue to be encountered, and we'll be leveraging that debate as well to address and advance issues that directly benefit and impact the arts and cultural sector. Funding, no need to go into this further. Critically important, particularly for the NEA. The NEA is the only federal agency that provides access to the arts in all 50 states, all U.S. territories. And so critically important that as just a foundational support entity, that the NEA, out of any other federal agency, the NEA is adequately funded to support individual arts organizations, arts related companies, arts communities, and to the extent that they can, individual creative workers. And we try to ensure, and we'll talk about this in a minute, try to ensure that the NEA and all other federal arts and cultural agencies, all other programs, arts education programs within the U.S. Department of Education has as much money as possible to do good at the state and local level. Presidential politics will be a factor going forward. It is important that next year, 2023, we get as much done as possible, because once we transition into 2024, more the nation, Congress, a lot of elected officials will be more focused on the presidential election and presidential politics. And so a lot of the work that Congress will do will not cease, but they will not be as focused on issues by the end of 2023. So 2023 is our year, and we can get a lot accomplished. Next slide, please. Congressional caucuses. So if you may or may not know, there's 5 arts and cultural caucuses, either in the House or in the Senate. You can see the list there. I would say that the arts and cultural sector engages more with the the Congressional Arts Caucus and the Senate Cultural Caucus, but all of the other caucuses are just as important. The Congressional Arts Caucus was created back in the early 1980s. There's about 120-ish U.S. representatives that are in this caucus that are supportive of arts and culture and the humanities, that have a large or have a large constituency that is based in the arts and in the humanities. And so they're our front line, if you will. So if the arts and cultural sector wants to see a piece of legislation introduced, we will go to this caucus and try to get support from the caucus, and then they will do the legwork to get their colleagues across the House or the Senate to support the legislation and to pass the legislation. So these caucuses are critically important. As a result of the elections, these caucuses have lost many representatives, particularly in the House. And so it is our job, my job, your job, and it's an easy ask, is to, once you develop your relationships with the elected officials, ask them to join either the Congressional Arts Caucus that's based in the House, or the Senate Cultural Caucus that's based in the Senate. These are, again, just great supporters and have been supportive of the arts and cultural sector over the years. Next slide, please. So as I'm indicated before, that the funding, annual appropriations for the NEA and other federal arts and cultural agencies are critically important to ensure that support for the sector gets to the state and local level. And so it's just been great news as far as the White House has been concerned. Every year around March, the president releases his or her budget for the federal government. And so what this current administration has done the last couple of years has proposed increases for the NEA and the NEH. To be more specific, for FY 2022, this current administration has proposed $201 million for the federal agencies, NEA and NEH. Right now, those agencies are receiving $180 million each. And so that's great news there. Back in for the next year, for this current year, FY 2023, that started October 1st, the White House has proposed $203.55 million. And so that's an increase there. Again, those agencies, NEA and NEH, are currently receiving currently receiving $180 million. And so again, huge increases. And so you should know that the White House is extremely supportive of the arts. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is a couple other things. Is when this current administration, when the president came aboard, he signed two important executive orders. One is to be able to advance equity and racial justice through the federal government. And so I will include in the chat what he has done. Let me get that into the chat. You will see in a couple of seconds a couple of executive orders and proclamations that the president has signed when he came into office to advance equity and racial justice through the federal government. And so as a result of this initiative, all federal agencies, more than 90 federal agencies, were required to develop and release equity action plans, including the NEA and the NEH. And I will also include in the chat the NEA's equity action plan, and that you will see in a couple of seconds. The equity action plan for the NEA, the goals, a couple of the goals are to increase data collection, to know what's going on out there in the sector. What's the access points? What is the lack of access for a variety of groups and communities to the arts? And so this will better inform not only the NEA, but also other federal arts and cultural agencies, as well as other federal agencies, as you will see in a couple of minutes. And so these equity action plans are critically important. For the NEA, this is incorporated in their strategic plan for the next 4 years. And so the NEA is actually particularly looking for partners to help them be held accountable, and then also to help them implement their equity action plan at the state and local level. So that's just a great piece of news there. There is also the current administration, the president also signed a presidential proclamation on September 30th that recognizes this past October as National Arts and Humanities Month. And so within that actually reestablishes the president's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. So the chairs of the NEA, the NEH, the chair of the Institute for Museum and Library Services will join about 25 other individuals across the country to have as an advisory group to talk about and discuss, again, how can the arts and cultural sector be better supported? What can the federal government do to support the arts and cultural sector? How can the private sector better support the arts and cultural sector? And so all these issues and a whole host of other issues will be issues that they will tackle. This advisory committee will have direct access to the president in order to inform him and the vice president on what they can do from a regulatory standpoint to be able to support the arts and cultural sector going forward. And so this is just great. And then another piece of this is requiring that other federal agencies collaborate with the NEA and the NEH and other federal arts and cultural agencies. And so think Department of Transportation, Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Justice. All these other federal agencies are required to collaborate with federal arts and cultural agencies to see how their respective programs and initiatives can benefit the sector. And then what can the federal arts and cultural agencies can do to inform the opera community and the arts and cultural sector to be able to better leverage these federal programs going forward. Just great news all around. And so that's all to say that there's support from this White House going forward. Next slide, please. I mentioned outstanding issues, things that need to be done by the end of this year. I mentioned the appropriations. And so the U.S. House of Representatives back in July passed $207 million for the NEA and the NEH. There is an action alert that I will include in the chat right now that you all can utilize to urge your senators to support at least $207 million for the NEA and the NEH. The Senate has come up with a proposed $195 million, certainly not enough compared to the House. It is more than what those agencies are receiving. But again, we want to make sure that those agencies have as much money as possible to be able to support the sector. And so this action alert that you'll see in a couple of seconds, quick action alert, you can input your information, your name, your address. The messaging is already there. You can click submit. It'll automatically go to your senators to urge at least that $207 million. And so if you can do that, it will be beneficial. The other thing that Congress will potentially consider is a tax policy package. And so you all may remember and have probably benefited from the Employee Retention Tax Credit Program that was passed by pandemic relief legislation a year ago. And the fourth quarter of the ERTC was eliminated to pay for the $2.1 trillion infrastructure package that was passed in November, the traditional infrastructure package, roads, bridges, airports, and the like. That fourth quarter of the ERTC was billions of dollars that could have gone to the sector that I know members relied upon to be able to retain their employees and maintain their operations. And so there is bipartisan legislation in the House and in the Senate to retroactively restore that fourth quarter. Action alert that I'll include in the chat. Again, will urge your elected officials to be able to that urge them to support the legislation, pass the legislation, include it in any big tax package that they will consider by the end of the year. The other important thing is to reestablish and increase federal incentives for charitable giving. So you may remember pandemic relief legislation established a universal non-itemized deduction of $300 for individuals, $600 for joint filers for to be able to, if those were contributions based on their charitable contributions to a variety of charities, those that do not itemize. As you know, most of the nation does not itemize. And so there is legislation, bipartisan legislation, to be able to, and I will include this in the chat as far as an action alert, to reestablish this universal non-itemized deduction, increase the incentive to $4,000 for individuals, $8,000 for joint filers, those that do not itemize and provide charitable contributions. And so we're trying to get that passed. And so those are the things that you can do now by the end of the year to get that passed. Next slide, please. Advocacy, I mentioned advocacy, the importance of advocacy. Where do I start? And I indicated the 3 pillars: relationships, telling your story, and then urging your elected officials to act, whether that's support or oppose legislation. The critical starting piece is relationships. And so they are home, your elected officials, particularly on Capitol Hill, they are home. They have offices. If they're senators, they have offices throughout their respective states. If they are representatives, they have key offices in key parts of their congressional district. And so if you see them at the post office, if you see them at the grocery store, they are around the district a lot during the year. These are important opportunities, and they also host town hall events. They are involved in a variety of community engagements. These are opportunities where you can just go up to that person, introduce yourself, indicate that you're from such and such opera company, talk about what the pandemic has done. Think about it as an elevator speech. If you're going on an interview, having that elevator speech, right? And so developing those relationships are critically important. You can do that in person. You can do that over email. You can do that over social media. I can guarantee you that each elected official is on social media, whether that's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Follow that person. Send that person a post, tag them, be creative, but develop those relationships are critically important. Their staff are critically important because they are the ones that are meeting with a variety of constituency groups and individuals. Staff are critically important. They need the respect that they deserve. Learn what their priorities are, invite elected officials and their staffers to performances. That is allowed under the law. Federal law, so you can do that. Engage with your state, national, and local media throughout the year. Try to determine who those contact people are within your media. Keep them posted as to what you are doing, and those relationships are critically important. Next slide, please. And so again, those relationships are critically important. As far as what to say, I kind of mentioned it. Really at the very least, thank them for what they have done. If they've been in office for a while, thank them for their leadership and their service during this current pandemic. Thank them for supporting legislation that has gone to your states and local communities. Ask how your company, as an individual can be a resource to them going forward. Again, they're encountering and looking at and reviewing legislation throughout the year. They're always looking for information on as to how legislation will impact their communities, their business community, their nonprofit sector. Tell your story. Telling your story is critically important to add a face to the issue that you're talking about. And then not only the creative piece, but the economic piece is critically critically important. And so what you'll see in the chat is a link to an economic analysis that the NEA and the US Department of Commerce release each year. The latest economic data is based from 2020, but it shows the economic impact of the arts and cultural sector. We're talking a little bit less than $900 billion, or 4.2% of the national GDP, as far as the production of arts and cultural goods. A little under $900 billion, 4.2%. I would say and argue that that is a critical piece of the national economy. Your elected officials need to know that. Within the link that you will see in a couple of seconds, there is a breakdown of and state profiles are provided. So you can find out as far as what the economic impact of the arts and cultural sector for your state in terms of the production of arts and cultural goods and the number of employed. And so if you're thinking as an elected official, you're always thinking about the economy and how you can improve the economy. You need to let your elected officials know that the arts and cultural sector can bring the heat and that they are a critical piece of the economy at all levels. Next slide. Just key takeaways from this discussion, and then I'll open it up for questions. And again, I appreciate your time. All this is very important information, but key takeaways: relationships are critically important, and you can do that now. Again, be creative, whether you're in person, whether it's social media, whether it's email. I can help you in that regard as far as getting started and where to start and who to connect with. But relationships are critically important in the relationship, in the advocacy space. Not only that, but to ensure that your company, that the local arts community is visible, that it maintains its visibility. And having those critical relationships, whether it's at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, or with your state and local emergency management agency, critically important. And it's not enough to just engage with them when you need something. You need to develop those relationships and maintain those relationships and keep them updated throughout the year. So sending them a quick email saying that you're doing such and such public performance, or you're going to execute such and such public programming, or that you have received a certain amount of funding and to thank them, or that you're utilizing your federal support or your state and local support to do X, Y, and Z for your local community. Those are things that you can do throughout the year to maintain and those relationships. And that only will increase your visibility. And again, I can be a resource to help you out in that regard. And utilizing and having Opera America as a resource. And then don't forget that you have other you have other partners, you have other allies within your states and within your local communities, whether that's your local business community, your chamber of commerce, or your business roundtable, but also other nonprofit sector organizations. Being able to collaborate, as I indicated, there is, and I'll include in the chat, there is right now, as a result of pandemic relief legislation that was passed by Congress, $350 billion that went to the states, local governments, and territorial governments. You all need to find out where that money is going. And so to the extent that you can, collaborate with your state arts councils, your local arts agencies, collaborate with the business community, collaborate with your other nonprofit sector partners to find out where that money is going and ensure that that money goes to the local arts and cultural sector. I'm going to include two other links, pieces of resources, and then I'll open it up for questions. One is the National Council of State Legislatures actually has a database that tracks where the $350 billion is going and how states are utilizing that funding. So you can get a kind of a sense of where that money is going and if that money is going to the local arts and cultural sector. And then the last resource that I'll include in the chat is a resource from the National League of Cities. And so they are tracking out of that $350 billion that I indicated, what the cities are doing with their federal share? What are the counties doing with their federal share? And so you can kind of get a sense, if you go to that database, that tracker, you can find out if your city and community is included, and then where that money is going. But it goes to, again, the key takeaway of collaborating with other partners, other allies, to be able to advance your interests, common issues of interest, and to ensure that the arts and cultural sector, your company, receive as much support as possible. And then the last thing that I will mention is this: your company, the local arts and cultural sector, is also a benefit for other industries. So you think of retail, you think construction, you think transportation, you think restaurants. They cannot survive and be as successful without the arts and cultural sector. You are driving the economic engine for your states and local communities. And so again, your elected officials need to know that. So I want to thank you all for your time. Next slide, please. And I'll open it up for any and all questions. Again, those action items, urging your newly elected officials to join those congressional caucuses, federal elected caucuses, those 2 action alerts for supporting increased funding for the NEA and the NEH. And then the other action item is urging the favorable tax incentives and reestablishing the employee retention tax credit program. So those are the 3 big things that you all need to think about, and I would appreciate your support and help on. And feel free to reach out to me to get more clarification, to get more help. Be more than happy to help you out in that regard. When is the most effective to contact federal? Can we find out more about? So as far as finding out if who your representatives and senators are, and then if they are a part of the caucuses, just send me a quick email, tshivers@operaamerica.org, and I can get you that information. Just a quick email, and just let me know. I can quickly help you out on that. The most effective time of the year to contact your representatives and senators, at any time and throughout the year. There is no special time. The only consideration is that the Congress has its calendar year as far as doing business, and so Congress is typically in session Tuesday through Thursday, and then they utilize Mondays and Fridays as their travel days, and then they have weeks where they are in the district. They call them district work weeks, where they're in the district, they're meeting with their constituents, they're having town halls, and that's throughout the year. And so I would send me an email. I can tell you what the calendar of events, or their legislative calendar is, and I can tell you when they're in your district and in your area, so you can engage with them. But anytime during the year is fine to engage and contact your federal elected officials. Any special action that should be taken with freshmen, that those are like totally new, that are non-incumbents, that have been elected particularly to Congress, but also at the state and local level with your mayors and local council men and women. So right now, actually, believe it or not, the freshmen, the newly elected freshmen that have never been in office, already have been in town last month for their orientation, for their onboarding. And so they get to learn about how to run a congressional office. They're meeting with potential staffers to help staff their congressional offices. And so again, as far as special action, I would actually reach out to them, whether it's via email, they're on social media. Again, I can help you try to locate them and get their contact information. Their official contact information will be available at the first part of the year. But the first action is to introduce yourself and to let them know that you're from Opera Company X. Let them know what the issues are. Again, they are a sponge right now, right? Great time to have them know about the issues before Congress starts, and then urge them to join, if they're newly elected official in Congress, urge them to join one of the congressional caucuses. And that is extremely helpful. And again, I can help you kind of get started. Just send me a quick email. We can have a quick discussion on that. There's another question: if politicians want to speak in front of constituents, is it appropriate appropriate to introduce them to speak at opera company events? Yes, that it is extremely, it is appropriate for you all to do that. I would suggest and urge to make a concerted effort and be intentional to invite all of your, or I would say your elected officials from both sides of the political aisle. Again, you should engage yourself and know that you are nonpartisan in nature. And so to the extent that you can invite both sides of the political aisle, that would just lend yourself to be just credible and just be nonpartisan in nature. And then, just indicate that you did go through the exercise of inviting the political counterpart, but he or she wasn't able to make it. But yes, totally appropriate to invite them to speak. Just make sure that it's, they are not providing some type of a political speech. Make sure they're just talking about how the arts and cultural sector is critically important, how the opera company is critically important in the space, and that they are a valuable member of the community. Those are good discussion topics that can be provided in any speech from an elected official.
Tony, thank you. It is so helpful to have these reminders, Tony, because to be an engaged citizen, to be a cultural citizen, isn't something you can do by being passive. It means you have to be active. And you have to be, and you and your board member colleagues, because remember, and just an emphasis here is that staff members are paid to be mouthpieces for the sector. They're paid to be mouthpieces for the organization. Members of boards are citizen leaders who are doing it as volunteers. And they have even more credibility with elected officials and the staff member of elected officials because they are seen to be less self-interested than paid staff. So even though the paid staff should do a lot of the work, involving board members is very important. But the way you would treat your largest foundation donor, inviting them to events, asking them to speak, thanking them in performance programs. I remember when I went to Carnegie Hall last season, there were big pages in the Carnegie Hall program thanking Senator Schumer for his support of the shuttered venue operators grants. Just, you would do that for a big corporate sponsor. You'd do that, you'd invite foundation officers to performances and to speak at events. Think of your elected officials and the staff members of your elected officials in the same way. So Tony, your reminder to us is so important, and your offer to help is even more important. Tony is about the most responsive colleague we have at Opera America. Shivers at operaamerica.org. Let him know if you have questions. Ask him for advice, and he will help you every step of the way. Tony, thank you for all that you do for us. We look forward to your further instruction, and together we'll have real victory with the 118th Congress. Thanks so much.